Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike's Medical Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Todorovich. I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Matthew Barton. How are you, Matt?
Hi, Mike.
You good? That's very Aussie.
I'm well.
So Aussie.
Well, we had a weekend of footies. Footy, 1, 2, 3, footy.
Yeah, the football.
So both the Brisbane teams lost.
Yes. And for our international listeners, that means nothing.
Well, Brisbane, hopefully people have heard of Brisbane outside Australia.
You reckon?
Third biggest city in Australia. It's the largest city in Queensland, which is...
Why do you know these Brisbane stats?
Anyway, go on. No one wants to hear Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike's geography lesson.
I don't think people listen to us to talk about sport, which is fine because I don't care much about sport unless I'm playing it and I'm the centre of attention. But we did have two grand finals. We had the Australian Football League grand finals, the AFL, where Brisbane was the team.
Brisbane Lions.
But they lost. And then we had the Rugby League grand final where the Brisbane Broncos.
Which is slightly different to rugby union, which currently there is a rugby union
Welcome to
World
Dr.
Cup.
Dr. Mike's Rugby and Football Podcast.
Now, did you know that, there isn't a state-based rugby union team in the World Cup. It's obviously Australia, but Australia's been knocked out.
Really?
So we're not doing well in that either.
I thought we just played Samoa or something yesterday.
We beat Portugal, but we got beaten by Wales and Fiji.
There you go. Fiji's pretty good though.
They are good.
All right. Okay.
So Australia's out. First time. It's kind of like Germany in the Soccer World Cup.
Oh, yeah.
Out in the pool round.
They weren't stoked with that, and we're probably not going to be stoked with being out of the union.
Well, my dad's Kiwi, so I'm going to All Blacks.
Oh, there you go. Perfect.
Easy way out.
Well, for me, I just don't watch it. It's an easier way out. All right. We're talking today about arterial blood gases, ABGs, not to get confused with AGBs, which...
AGBs.
After grog bog, there's another Australian term for you, which I remember being...
You had to explain what grog is.
So grog is alcohol, and I remember in my 20s, not me, but friends of mine would say, oh, no, I've got to take an after grog bog, an AGB, which supposedly was a terrible, terrible bowel movement after a night on the alcohol. I would not know. So
you never had one?
No, I've never defecated. But my breath stinks. But no, not AGB, ABG, arterial blood gases, which is going to be a clinical way of evaluating somebody's pH and also the cause of the possible pH disturbance or change. And so I think this then sort of leads us to having to talk about pH. One of our prior episodes, we spoke about buffering. So we did extensively go into pH changes and the way that the body sort of tries to compensate and maintain a relatively stable pH. But I think we do need to reintroduce pH into this episode.
Yes.
Just in case that one person that listens to our podcast decided not to listen to the buffering episode.
Agreed.
pH.
But it could also be called VBGs as well. So
Really?
not just arterial blood gas.
Good.
But venous.
Oh,
blood
venous
gas.
blood gas. So not just arterial.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that?
Well, I think we should.
All right. What,
Not right now.
Okay.
But I believe that it's been conducted more clinically now because it's just easier to get venous blood than it is to get arterial blood.
All right. We'll talk about that shortly. But before we do, pH.
Yeah.
pH stands for the power of hydrogen ions or the potential of hydrogen ions. And basically when you're measuring the pH inside of a solution, and in this case it's going to be the body.
What solution do you want? I've got all the solutions you could think of right in front of me.
Milk.
Milk, I think I actually don't have that one. Unless it's breast milk. Yes, I've got breast milk.
Do you have breast milk? All right.
Breast milk has a range of 6.4 to 7.6
There you
pH.
go.
So it kind of...
Slightly acidic, yeah. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Stomach acid?
Well, that would depend on if you've just eaten or if your stomach's empty.
Let's just say I've just eaten a delicious cheeseburger and I'm trying to digest those proteins.
Probably ballpark 2.
Okay.
pH of 2.
All right. And what about bile?
Bile is getting closer to the basic. Let me find bile coming straight. Well, it's coming out of your liver. It's 7.5.
Right.
So it's more basic, but then it gets more acidic in your gallbladder.
Okay.
So your gallbladder, because it concentrates the bile, presumably makes it slightly more acidic, but then it meets up with its best friend, the bicarbonate pancreatic juices.
Yep.
And that's going to be much more basic, so approaching 9.
Okay. Let's just ignore all that and talk about so basically
this is in your body anyway.
Yeah, so you've thrown out a bunch of numbers and these numbers sit between 0 and 14.
I think you basically said the most acidic location in your body is going to be your stomach.
Yeah.
And the most basic is going to be your pancreas.
Yeah.
Okay. And then your blood is as kind of neutral as it's going to be in your physiological processes.
Yeah. So if you were to have a look at, the pH range is between 0 to 14, right? And this is a number that is representative of the concentration of hydrogen ions in your body. So when we say hydrogen ions, we're talking about hydrogen. So remember, you've got all of these atoms on the periodic table: hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, neon, sodium, magnesium.
Is that in order?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you have a look, our body is going to have a number of those elements from the periodic table inside of us, and some of them will have a charge. So this includes hydrogen, this includes sodium, potassium, chloride.
Do we have all
magnesium,
the elements
calcium
in our body?
We do not. No, only around about 59
Okay.
of the 118 odd elements of the periodic table. And so some of them need that charge. And so hydrogen is one of them. So if you have a look at, if I were to take your blood right now and measure the concentration of these charged elements from the periodic table, it'll have a measurement, right? And that's going to be in a unit. So the units could be millimoles per litre, it could be milliequivalents, it could be deciliter, whatever. Let's just say millimoles per litre. That's what we're going to use now. And if I were to measure the
For everything today?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So I measure your concentration of sodium in your blood, right? In millimoles per litre, do you know what it's probably going to be around about?
I should point out here that when you take blood, it is a representation of extracellular fluid.
So all the stuff bathing your cells.
That's right.
All right.
Sorry, question?
Nope. Okay, pull it out. Sodium concentration, what is it in millimoles per litre?
135 to 145.
Okay, so it's around about 142 millimoles per litre. Potassium, K plus.
3.5 to 5.
Okay. Millimoles per litre.
Yep.
All right, we'll stick.
Or
we'll stick to that unit.
milliequivalents.
All right. Do you know what chloride might be?
100 to 105,
Something like
110.
that? Okay.
Call it 104 because that's going to be important a bit later on.
Hydrogen ions.
This is where you need a scientific calculator with a lot of decimal points.
Yeah, so it's 0.00004 millimoles per litre. Right, so that's a small number, and we don't want to write a number so small with so few zeros. And so...
And if it wasn't moles per litre, it would be 7 zeros, right?
Yeah, it'd be 0.0000004 moles per litre.
So there's 7 zeros before the 4, and that's important.
Yes,
I suspect.
It is because some smart people go, I don't want to write it with all these zeros because if I add a zero or remove a zero, well, it's the difference between life and death. So they go, let's figure out another way to write it. And one way that if you know your, year 10 maths, if you want to get rid of a bunch of zeros in a number, if it's a
using an eraser or liquid paper.
That's how you did it. Hence why you went into biology. If the number is greater than 1, you can get rid of those zeros by just taking the log of the number, right? But if the number's below 1, you can take the negative log. And so in this case, we're going to take the negative log. So if you were to take the negative log of
what you just said,
0.0000004 mole or molar, the number you're going to get is 7.4.
Yeah, which is smack bang where your blood pH should be.
That's right. So all that pH is saying, the pH of your blood being 7.4 is exactly like saying the concentration of hydrogen ions in your blood is 0.0000004 molar.
Okay.
Or 0.00004 millimolar or millimoles per litre.
Or 4 nanomolar
Or
per
4
litre.
nanomolar per litre. That's right. So again, pH is just another. Now, because it is negative log, it's inverse.
Yeah.
So
right. This is where it becomes not difficult, but sometimes students will slip up.
yeah. So the lower the pH number. So if it's 7, there's going to be 0 followed by 7 zeros, a 0 dot, then 7 zeros, and then a number. If it's a pH of 6, there's
Like
only
it's
6 zeros.
urine or saliva.
Yeah. If it's a
There's
pH,
actually more hydrogen in it. So the number's getting smaller, but there's actually 10-fold more hydrogen ions.
that's right. That's right. So
So this is where it sometimes gets confusing.
yes. But at the end of the day, all you need to know is that if something's of a pH of 7 and below, so from 0 to 7, it's acidic, which means there's a lot of hydrogen ions.
Like
And-
HCl.
Yep, like hydrochloric acid. Or if it's above 7 to 14, there's going to have less hydrogen ions, and we term that solution more basic. So it's just all pH is the measurement of free floating hydrogen ions in the solution. That's it. Right?
Got it.
And the reason why this is a problem, the reason why we talk about pH so much as an issue is because hydrogen is the smallest atom on the periodic table. And when it's got it's a small hydrogen, it's got this positive charge, and it's really good at sneaking around and stealing.
Sounds like you.
Thank you. And stealing. Yes, that's true.
Small, very
Sneaky.
energetic, sneaky.
Steals.
Steals.
Steals electrons from a whole bunch of structures, and we know that something that's really negatively charged has all these negative electrons associated with it is proteins. And because everything that's functional is made up of proteins, if we've got too many free-floating hydrogen ions, it's going to disrupt the proteins,
Okay. Okay. Yep.
right? So the proteins, they won't work properly. Same. So
Where are these proteins found?
everywhere, man. They're in the blood, they're in the body. They make up you, they make up me. They're functional. They can be receptors. They can be carrier molecules. They can be neurotransmitters. They can be everything and anything that has function or structure.
So what you're
or both.
saying is if the hydrogen balance is either too much or not enough, then this is going to affect the way that protein structures are maintained.
Yeah, that's
which
it.
then, as we know, this term would be called denature
Yep.
or denaturing. And we know that if you change the structure of a protein, its function will probably turn off. Is that correct?
Yeah, or change.
And so this is pretty much, I was going to say basic, but then I get confused. This is pretty much why a slight derangement of pH has devastating effects in the body.
Yeah, because as soon as you bugger your proteins up, nothing works.
Nothing works.
Right? So does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, that's good.
And this is why we need to maintain it in smack bang around 7.4.
Yeah, 7.35, 7.45, so yeah, 7.4. So in saying that, we need to understand all the things that can alter hydrogen ion concentration, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff. First point we should probably state is that when you undergo metabolism, so you take your 3 main macronutrients, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, right?
Okay,
When
so
you-
metabolism as in making energy.
Yeah, the whole point of us ingesting food in the form of proteins, fats, and carbs is to 1, make energy, and 2, have the resources or building blocks to maintain structure,
Okay.
right? So we need the energy and the structure.
So energy in the form of ATP.
Yep.
So your question is, how do we make
ask
ATP
one.
through the diet? Now, did you say macronutrients?
I just asked you what the 3 were.
Okay, I was getting there.
But that's okay.
All right. The 3 macronutrients that you would typically ingest would be carbohydrate,
Yep.
fats, and proteins.
Very good. Okay, congratulations. You've passed grade 3. So if you take carbohydrates and fats and you metabolize them to make this energy, it releases carbon dioxide.
All of them?
Fats and carbohydrates, just those 2. Fats and carbohydrates, when you metabolize them, it produces carbon-based acids. And
you
what
could
that means is carbon dioxide.
But you could make an argument that proteins also, right? Because it doesn't breaking up the protein into amino acids, then breaking the amino acid into its carbon end. Doesn't that kind of go into sugar?
No.
Okay.
No. So it releases into sugar.
Like glucose-based.
No. So what ends up happening is that, I mean, if you're talking about using amino acids within the Krebs cycle to make energy, yes, you could. But I'm talking about the direct metabolism of these. So using proteins as an energy source isn't preferable. Usually it's as a building block, right?
Okay.
So when we take carbohydrates and we take fats, and we split them up and rearrange them, ultimately we release hydrogen ions and electrons, but we also release carbon dioxide.
Okay.
And we end up releasing around about 15,000 moles of carbon dioxide every day.
What does that make that into some reference?
It's around about 300 litres of carbon dioxide gas.
300 litres, like a bath.
Yeah, but of gas.
Gas. Well, I'd had baths with gas.
Well, you have a bath and then make gas. So 300 litres of carbon dioxide sounds like a ridiculous amount, but if you think about it, we probably exhale 12,000 litres of carbon dioxide a day. So, but a significant number of that, 300 litres, comes just from metabolizing carbohydrates and fats.
So say that again. So you are making 300 litres of CO2 a day, but
Yes.
you just said we breathe more out.
Yes.
So where's the extra coming from?
So it's coming from other processes. So all the cells of your body,
Oh, okay. So this is just from energy metabolism.
this is just from breaking these
Okay.
molecules up and releasing carbon dioxide.
Okay.
Right? But all the cells of your body are going to be producing carbon dioxide as a byproduct as well. So here's an important point, is that before I move on to the next point, the reason why we're bringing this up is because when carbon dioxide is released, it mixes in with the fluids of your body, which is mostly water. And when CO2, carbon dioxide, mixes with water, H2O, smush those elements together, you produce H2CO3.
Yes, we spoke about this last podcast on the buffering system.
Yep.
So this is probably the most important buffering equation when it comes to, the bicarbonate buffering equation all the different buffering systems, right?
Yeah.
This one is probably the most important to learn.
So when it comes together, it forms H2CO3, which is carbonic acid. And the definition of an acid is it hates itself and splits itself apart.
Is that really the definition? So
Look, every time I say that to
I'm pretty
students,
sure
they
if you
remember.
look that up in
Students have written
Oxford
that in
Dictionary,
exams.
it hates itself.
Yeah. It hates itself, so it splits itself apart and releases a hydrogen ion. But it also releases its conjugate base. So here's the thing about acids. All acids release hydrogen ions, H+, also known as protons.
So that's the definition. It's a hydrogen donator.
Yep. But what's left over is it doesn't just release that and then there's nothing. You pull an H+ off it, and so it's
Left with the base.
left with a negatively charged something.
And that's going to be important a bit later when we talk about anions and anion gap.
Yes. So take carbonic acid in this case, carbon dioxide mixes with water, produces carbonic acid, releases hydrogen ions, H+, and it's left with HCO3 negative, which is bicarbonate ion, and that's the conjugate base, which means it's reversible because bases, by definition, can mop up.
Love themselves.
They love themselves, so they want more. So they bind to hydrogen ions and can mop up to form an acid, the conjugate acid. So this equation, like you just said, is the bicarbonate buffer equation.
Goes in two directions.
Two directions, and there's multiple parts. CO2 and H2O. Then there's carbonic acid.
So CO2 is made in every single cell in the body.
Yep.
Water's everywhere.
Yep.
So that works out well.
Yep.
Carbonic acid splits pretty quickly. It doesn't like staying as it is.
Correct. Hates itself, mate.
And separates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate.
That's right. And anytime you have free-floating hydrogen ions in a solution, the pH will drop, i.e. become more acidic.
And the problem with having all these excessive hydrogen ions is in a location, either in a cell or in extracellular fluid, they're likely the protein's going to be buffering these things up, which then changes its structure, which is the problem.
That is exactly right.
Okay.
So that's the first thing, is that you produce carbon dioxide through metabolizing carbohydrates and fats, 300 odd litres of it, right? But that carbon dioxide can undergo that process to form hydrogen ions. So makes the solution acidic. But that's not the only way your body or aspects of the body can become acidic, because protein and amino acid metabolism can produce non-carbonic acids and again directly produce hydrogen ions because they're called amino acids. So they can release acids directly. But there's a whole bunch of other processes. Again, listen to the buffering podcast, that our body can produce hydrogen ions. But I think here what we need to talk about is the fact that we may produce all these hydrogen ions, right, in the body, but the body's really good at buffering it out, right? So I could effectively inject into you a lot of acid and your pH would probably only drop from 7.4 to maybe 6.4.
So when you say acid, you mean
Hydrochloric acid or just hydrogen ions?
Not something you do at a rock concert.
No.
Okay.
No.
Different podcast.
Different episode. Different time in your life. So because it only drops now, dropping from a 7.4 to 6.4 sounds like, that's not much. But that's 10 times the amount of hydrogen ion change, right? Because remember, each time you drop from one pH unit to the next, you're changing it by 10 times, which means you're adding or removing is 0.
Yep.
Right? All right. So
you said injecting my blood with
it would be yours.
an acid, hydrochloric acid, this would, what would happen?
Oh, well, you would die. Especially
Depends on how much, I guess.
If it dropped down to 6.4, you would be getting very, very sick to the point that you would probably be close to dying if your kidneys weren't overwhelmed. So your body goes, too many hydrogen ions. I'm going to mop it up. And it binds to the bicarbonate to produce carbonic acid, which will split apart in the opposite direction and produce carbon dioxide.
Okay.
And you'll try and hyperventilate to breathe it out.
Get rid of the CO2.
So it tries to get rid of it through breathing.
And that's a very fast way of doing it.
Yeah, super immediate. Or it'll tell the kidneys, which is a bit slower, hey, excrete that hydrogen ion out in my urine and try and reabsorb more bicarbonate to try and mop it up. Right?
So this is likely to take a day to do this.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, what we've just spoken about is that sort of covers everything in regards to the way your body tries to manage deviations in acid-base imbalances, which then leads us into arterial blood gases and what it all means.
Okay.
Because we haven't spoken about the specific mechanisms like OCs or OCs.
Well, let's do that now then.
Emias.
Okay.
All right, you start.
Well, which one do you want to start with, OCs or emias? We'll start with emias.
Sure.
Emia, we already know that this means blood.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got condition.
If anyone watches Chubby Emu, there is a meme that he has where he puts his finger up in the air and he goes, "Emia means presence in the blood."
Okay.
There's T-shirts. You can buy those T-shirts. Anyway, Chubby Emu is amazing. Watch him on YouTube.
He basically just goes through crazy case studies.
Yeah, sort of like this guy drank 40 cans of Mother. What happened to his
liver.
heart?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I use his case scenarios a couple of times in class.
Really? Even though they're outrageous and
there was a good one. It makes it difficult because it's a very good video production and it's very catchy and
they're awesome.
engaging. But I use
Why aren't
one.
we engaging?
I don't know. Probably me.
Listeners write in and agree.
I used it for melanoma.
Right.
So a farmer, this is his case, a farmer had this lesion, had no time to be sick, so he just cut it out himself.
Right.
So he just hacked the lesion out, wrapped it up, got on with his farming, and then sometime later he noticed a lump under his armpit on the same arm, and then a bit later on still he started to get neurological deficits.
Boy.
So obviously melanoma spreading.
Metastasized.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I use it as a case example in my cancer topic.
Okay. That was a bit depressing, wasn't it? So emia?
Okay, so emia just anyway, emia means relating to blood. So you could have an anemia or hypoxemia or hyperkalemia. So this just refers to something in blood. Okay, so when we're referring to emia in the context of today, you could have acidemia, which would be acid in blood.
Yep. So a high concentration of hydrogen ions in the blood is acidemia.
Or alkalemia.
Which is a low concentration of hydrogen ions in the blood.
Yep.
Now, the processes that either raise or lower these hydrogen ions is called an osis.
Osis. So osis, I guess, just means a process of.
So osis is a process. Very good.
Nice.
Okay. So anything that will raise the concentration of hydrogen ions in the blood is called an acidosis. And anything that reduces the concentration of hydrogen ions in the blood is an alkalosis.
That's right.
All right. So we've got emias and OCs. Anything else that we need to define before
No,
we move
then
forward?
basically.
Stop playing basically.
When
Say
you.
alkalinically.
But particularly when we look at processes in the whole body, because you could have when we talk about the pH and abnormalities or derangements,
Yeah.
you can have, particularly when we look at that equation, the bicarbonate buffering equation, because you spoke about CO2.
Yep.
Yes, it does get made in every cell, but there's only one location in the body that can really, truly get rid of it, and that's the lungs.
True. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas,
Have you ever tried to wee out carbon dioxide?
well, I guess in some ways you probably do,
Okay, let's not go
but
into
not directly,
No.
like breathing it out.
No, I've never. Yeah,
It could get repackaged into other molecules, which you could possibly make a
case full.
weak argument for, but
Yeah, like
in
weak acid.
but in the true sense, to get rid of CO2, you have to breathe it out.
Okay.
Now, when you go to the other end of the equation, where you had the hydrogen and the bicarbonate,
Yep.
again, multiple things could be making these things or altering them, but it's really the kidneys that maintain it or regulate it.
So if we were to, and if you're watching this as a YouTube video, you probably will be seeing the equation jump up on the screen right now, fingers crossed. You'll see that on the end that's got the CO2, the lungs deal with the CO2. Right. And then on the other end with the hydrogen ions and bicarbonate, the kidneys deal with that. So you've got this beautiful equation where you can change the pH of your blood by either breathing or by playing around with the kidneys.
Yeah.
Right. So, which is a good indication as to what might be happening if anything's out of whack pH-wise.
That's right.
So you could effectively take some parts of that equation. You could measure some of those things in somebody's body and measure the balance and range of them.
That's right.
And it might give you an indication as to whether the pH is out of whack because the respiratory side isn't working properly or whether the renal or metabolic side isn't working properly.
That's right.
Okay.
Now, with that it's said now, because you're focusing, let's say you're focused on the carbon dioxide end,
All right.
because you really only got one organ that can get rid of it,
Yes.
you can only really have one respiratory-driven osis at one time. So you can't have a acidosis and an alkalosis from a respiratory issue at the same time.
Okay.
Okay, does that make sense?
You can't have a respiratory acidosis and a respiratory alkalosis.
Correct.
You can only have one or the other.
That's right.
And it makes sense because you're either breathing out that CO2
Yeah.
or you're not.
So you're either
You can't do both.
hypoventilating or hyperventilating.
Yeah.
You can't do both.
No.
That's right. Now, when you go to the other
If you
end,
do, you're just doing normal breathing.
there we go. You go to the other end, which could be conditions that are making too much acid
Yeah.
or losing acid
Yeah.
or conditions that are losing bicarbonate or gaining bicarbonate.
So, for example, I could be vomiting, which is losing.
Well, I'm going to get to this, so don't spoil it.
Oh, but I'm just giving an example
yeah.
in which I could lose all the hydrogen ions just say from vomiting because my stomach's got a lot of
So
hydrogen
acidic,
ions.
yeah.
But at the same time, I might have a problem with my pancreas,
Yep.
and I'm not producing enough, or I'm producing too much bicarbonate, maybe.
Okay.
So you could have, or I'm not producing enough.
Yep.
So you could have the alkalosis from losing hydrogen ions, but you can also have an acidosis by losing or not producing enough bicarbonate ions.
Yep.
And it's like, whoa.
So when we look at
these are
these,
metabolic.
so when we look at these derangements, anything that affects the CO2 is
Yep.
respiratory,
Okay.
and everything at the other end, because it's whole body,
Yeah.
we call it metabolic.
And at the end of the day, it's all affecting hydrogen ions.
Yeah.
So you could take the hydrogen ions out of that, right? And say the hydrogen ions equal the bicarbonate over carbon dioxide.
Yeah. So that's the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation.
It is an altered Henderson-Hasselbalch equation because I hate the Henderson.
You hate that guy?
No, I don't hate whoever Henderson-Hasselbalch
Is Henderson the guy with the TV show?
No idea.
Oh, okay.
Who are you talking about?
Keep going.
Okay, so I remember doing bike.
Harry and the Hendersons.
Are you talking about the Bigfoot?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember watching Harry. So strange you said that. Yesterday driving home, I remembered Harry and the Hendersons, and it may be because I was thinking about this equation. Anyway, the equations, and I'm going to be blasted by biochemists here. The equation is dumb. Now, it's not dumb because it's useless. It's just dumb because it's not necessarily an intuitive equation. But you can take the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation and you can rearrange it. So in this case, when we talk about pH and arterial blood gases, just have the concentration of bicarbonate at the top of the fraction and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide at the bottom of the fraction.
Oh, it's got to stay in balance.
And it's got to stay in balance. And that equals the hydrogen ion concentration, also known as the pH.
Yeah.
Right? And so something we haven't spoken about yet is the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. We've spoken about carbon dioxide, but we haven't spoken about what partial pressure means. And effectively, because carbon dioxide is a gas, gases only move down a pressure gradient.
Henry's law.
It is Henry's law. Yes.
So that's the solubility of carbon dioxide in water.
Yes. Well, yes, that's right. But you could also say Dalton's law is about partial pressures more specifically because the solubility of a gas is related to its partial pressure, but each gas has a different solubility.
Yeah.
So
CO2 is more soluble in water than oxygen, for instance.
yes, and Dalton's law is specifically about partial pressures.
But for today, we're just going to keep us at sea level.
All right. So basically, the partial pressure is the pressure of that one gas. And so gases only move down their own concentration gradients, just like ions will move down their own concentration gradient.
Yep.
So the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, for example, we would measure in millimeters of mercury.
So there goes your millimolar thing that you said you're going to
Well, that's
use
why I
every
laughed
unit.
and said, yeah, okay. And then I went, oh, maybe. So if you now have CO2 in this equation and bicarbonate in this equation, bicarbonate over CO2, that's basically looking at whether something's respiratory based or metabolic based. Now, somebody could have asked, why isn't hydrogen ions in the equation since it's all about hydrogen ions? Because it's about the hydrogen ions is what we're finding out about. That's the pH equals the bicarbonate over the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide to tell us about the pH derangement. And if the pH derangement is due to a change in the carbon dioxide, we can go, oh, it's respiratory based.
Yep.
So either a respiratory acidosis or a respiratory alkalosis. Or if there's a change in the bicarbonate,
Good
we can
point.
say it's a metabolic based
Okay.
acidosis or alkalosis. And it's that easy. Now, you can have changes in one or the other, making it a bit more straightforward, but you can have changes in both, which could be a combined or it could be a compensation, right?
That's true.
Right.
Or you could have many at the same time.
Very true.
And so then by kind of summating all of those osises together and then you equate it as an anemia, then it becomes whatever the dominant one is will dictate what the emia is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you may have, okay, I'm going to give you an example now. Now, Mike is preparing for a particular event, sporting event, even though he doesn't like watching the event, but he likes performing the event.
That's right.
Now, in this particular event,
Ice skating?
Mike had to prepare and lose some weight before he gets weighed in.
Didn't know I had much to lose, but
So to do this, he took a diuretic.
all right.
He thought, I need to lose a lot of
Fluid.
weight. The best way to lose a lot of fluid is take a loop diuretic.
Right.
Now, taking a loop diuretic, because you're losing a lot of fluid, it will contract your blood volume.
So you mean the blood volume goes down?
Yeah, because you're losing free water.
So instead of having 6 litres of blood in my body, I might have 5.5.
Yep. Now, the location of where the loop diuretic works is kind of downstream from where you reabsorb bicarbonate. Okay?
All right.
So you're actually, relative to water loss, you're holding on to more bicarbonate.
Okay.
Okay, so Mike, by taking this loop diuretic, actually starts to develop metabolic alkalosis
Because I'm reabsorbing more bicarbonate back into the
relative to water.
body. Yep.
Okay, does that make sense? Now, before the event, Mike gets a bout of diarrhea.
All right.
Okay, so he starts crapping himself.
Yeah, that's not uncommon for me.
Now, what happened? What's the downside of losing a lot of poo? Is you're not getting
More weight loss.
More weight loss. Yeah, very good. We'll get that. That's going to come in a bit further. So losing a lot of fluid, but you're losing fluid so quickly through your GIT tract, you're not given a chance to reabsorb your bicarbonate that your pancreas is pushing out. Okay. So you're actually now causing an acidosis, a metabolic acidosis, because your gastrointestinal tract is losing bicarbonate. So you've got two processes happening at once. You've got your kidney issue, well, it's not really issue, from your diuretic, so that's an alkalosis.
Yep.
And you've got your acidosis coming from just bicarbonate loss through the poo.
Okay, so what am I?
But wait, you're about to start the event and you get an anxiety attack and start hyperventilating.
Yeah, that's happened. Yeah.
So now you're losing CO2.
Yeah, I'm breathing it
So
all
now
out.
you're developing a respiratory alkalosis.
Yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah.
because I don't have any CO2 in my
That's
body
right.
to make acid. Yep.
And then you start your competition
Yeah.
and you go into this huge bout of
Exertion.
anaerobic respiration,
So I'm making lactic acid.
lactic acid,
So I'm becoming acidotic.
metabolically.
Right. What? So I started off having metabolic acidosis,
Alkalosis
alkalosis,
from the diuretic.
and then it became metabolic acidosis,
But
and then it became respiratory alkalosis, and now I've got metabolic acidosis.
But my point here is it's not like this happens, then this happens. This could be all happening concurrent to each
Right.
other.
So all you're saying is that the
Multiple
hydrogen ion
processes are
concentration,
happening.
which is changing the hydrogen ion concentration continually.
Now, depending on which one of those four things I just mentioned dominates, would determine what your EMIA is.
Right.
Does it make sense?
Yeah. So it's sort of just like saying you've got 3 or 4 pots of paint, right? And you're taking scoops of the paint and putting it into the palette,
Yeah.
right? And you're mixing it up and you're basically saying whichever color overwhelms the others is the
Pretty
final
much.
color.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
might have a whole bunch of different colors
Yeah, mixed
contributing
into it.
to it, but it's the final color. So all those individual pots are the OCs, acidoses, alkaloses,
That's right.
but then the final thing is the EMIA, which
Correct.
is going to be the issue.
That's right. And then you can determine by doing a blood gas strip where the dominant issue is, whether there's compensation of the other system trying to deal with it, and they're basically then moving into the root cause to try to rectify that whole issue.
All right, so that's confusing but important to bring up.
The point I did that particular analogy or example
so that I
was just to show
vomiting,
that
pooing, hyperventilating.
multiple processes could be happening at once. So in your patients, you could have multiple things happening.
Yeah, that's right.
Don't
Yeah.
just think it's just one. You could have a kidney issue, diabetes happening, so ketoacidosis, and you could have them becoming hypervolemic, so a type of shock,
Yep.
and then they're becoming acidotic as a result,
True. Yeah, that's a good point.
whilst having COPD.
Yeah. All right. So let's break this down and make this a little bit simpler for everybody now that we're 40 minutes into the podcast. But before we do that, let's stop for a quick break. And we're back from that quick break. Wow, how quick was that? Good. So a couple of things. When your body's pH changes due to hydrogen ion concentration changes, 3 things are going to happen, and we've alluded to those. The very first thing that happens is the internal buffers of your body try and either mop up any excess hydrogen ions or release hydrogen ions depending on the pH status.
And they could be extracellular, intracellular.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the next thing that happens is your breathing can change if it needs to. So that's the next thing. So you can hyperventilate to get rid of more
So
carbon
really
dioxide.
quickly, in say a minute, how does your body know to do that? The breathing change.
Well, it does it by the fact that if you've got excess hydrogen ions, it binds to the bicarbonate and will ultimately, through that bicarbonate buffer equation, produce carbon dioxide. And that excess carbon dioxide will stimulate chemoreceptive zones in your various arteries and brainstem, which
So
triggers
carotid,
you to
aortic arch, and your CSF
yep,
brainstem.
and that will trigger you to hyperventilate to
That
get
will
rid
trigger
of it.
your respiratory center to say, speed up your breathing, please.
Yep. Or if the CO2 is low, it just inhibits that and you will hypoventilate or breathe normally. And now I've totally lost track. Oh, yeah. Okay. So breathing. So ventilation. And then the next thing that will happen if you continue to have abnormalities or disturbances in your pH is your kidneys will kick in and start to either excrete hydrogen ions or reabsorb bicarbonate or
both.
Or both, or neither. Right, so those 3 things, buffers, ventilation, then renal system. Now the concentration of, because the 3 main things we need to look at now is the pH. So you take an ABG, you look at the pH, right? you look at the partial pressure of carbon dioxide and you look at the concentration of bicarbonate ions. And so the pH should be between 7.35 and 7.45.
Mm-hmm.
The partial pressure of carbon dioxide should be between 36.
Just drop the sevens.
Oh, yeah. Okay. You could say, yeah. All right. So
Sevens go to heaven.
So 35 to 45
Got it.
millimeters of mercury. So 7.35, 7.45, get rid of it. 35 and 45 millimeters of mercury for carbon dioxide. That's good. And then bicarbonate is between 22 and 26 millimoles per litre, right? So that's
Possibly up to 28, but yeah.
That's in your arterial. Should we say what it is for venous?
I don't think it changes dramatically.
Well, I can say. So the pH is a little bit lower.
A little bit more acidic.
7.32 to 7.38. And again, you could drop the sevens, but it won't work because it's going to be 42 to 48.
Okay.
So pH drops and CO2 goes up in venous.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Why? Why does it make sense? Tell our dear listener. Why?
Well, venous blood is generally being utilised by the tissue and it's going back to the respiratory system to be breathed out, or some of it anyway.
Yeah, so the veins of the body take up the CO2 exhaust fumes of the cells to breathe out.
And you need this gradient to drive the CO2 across the blood into your alveoli, so to breathe out.
Yeah, and the bicarbonate's barely changed for the venous. It's probably a little bit higher, 23 to 27 millimoles per litre. Is that cool?
Yep.
All right, so if we just focus on arterial at the moment, we should have a think about the fact that, like Matt was saying, you can have respiratory-based and metabolic. So respiratory acidosis, respiratory alkalosis. You can have metabolic acidosis, metabolic alkalosis. And if you think of that equation that we spoke about earlier, with you got the concentration of bicarbonate on top, over in the equation, partial pressure of carbon dioxide, you can have a look and see what the pH is overall and how those two things change. So what do you want to start with? Respiratory acidosis?
No, I think we should start with the hardest.
Really?
Yeah, just get out of the road.
I reckon do that. Okay. Fine.
Because by the time we get to the end of the podcast, people's working memory will be gone.
Well,
And they'll
people
be like,
don't listen
"I
to
can't remember all
podcasts in
this."
one go, man. They probably listen to this over the span of 16 weeks since it's going to be a 4-hour podcast. All right. Okay, fine. Metabolic acidosis. Is that where you want to go?
Yep.
All right. That's where Matt wants to go. So metabolic tells
So let's
you-
break it down simply.
All right.
Firstly, it's an acidosis.
Yeah.
So that means the pH has to go down.
Yep. So
Happy with
hydrogen
that?
ions are going up.
Yep. The next, because it's metabolic,
Mm-hmm.
what you'll be looking for to confirm that it is metabolic is bicarbonate.
Yeah.
And bicarbonate, I'm not going to say basic, but bicarbonate has to go down by definition to make it a metabolic acidosis.
Yes.
Okay, so
But wait, for the listener, they might be going, why? Why does the bicarbonate? So in a metabolic acidosis, why is the bicarbonate going down?
okay, so there's a couple of causation reasons for this.
Yeah.
So
But regardless,
it's either going to be, so why is it going down? Well, it's either freely lost in poo or wee,
yeah.
or it's buffering
Yeah.
an acid. That's it.
Okay.
That's the reason why it's going down. In your blood test, in your blood gas strip, if you see a low pH, so the pH is outside the range of what it should be, and the bicarbonate is lower than it should be, it's by definition a metabolic acidosis process going on.
So by
Now-
definition, it has to be, a metabolic acidosis has to be a drop in bicarbonate
Yeah,
levels.
that's right.
Right. And that drop can be due to a direct loss of bicarbonate or
Yeah, and
a
that's not-
reduction, oh, you interrupt every time, or a reduction of bicarbonate because it's binding to free hydrogen
Yeah,
ions.
that's right.
All right. And that's a metabolic acid, that's representing metabolic
Yeah.
acidosis.
Yep.
All right. Now, if we look at that equation, it's just the bicarbonate, right? The CO2 not changing, really.
Not
Straight away.
Not at this point.
Because we're not talking about compensation.
That's right. We're not talking about compensation. So we're not trying to think how the respiratory system's coming in to deal with this.
No, we're not talking about dealing with it. We're just talking about the issue at hand.
That's right.
CO2's unchanged. It's just the bicarbonate.
Yeah.
Okay. Now what do you want to talk about? So we know the bicarbonate's gone down. That's representing metabolic acidosis. Should we talk about the causes, or do you want to talk about?
Well, the causes can be categorized as anything that can increase hydrogen production.
Yep.
Okay. Anything that can increase hydrogen ingestion.
Yep.
So if you were just to take in acid by ingestion.
Yes. Anything increasing free hydrogen ions in the body.
Or the body can't excrete hydrogen, so that typically would be the kidney.
So it accumulates, yep.
Okay. Or you're just losing bicarbonate through wee or poo.
Okay. I've got a mnemonic which should be able to help us remember this. So mud piles is the one that
mud piles
typically used.
Well,
but I've changed it.
We should say here mud piles. Well, this is going to complicate things. It's a touch more. The other way.
Here we go.
The other way to categorize, and this is important, particularly clinically.
Yeah.
The other way to categorize metabolic acidosis is something called high anion gap or normal anion gap metabolic acidosis.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that now or park it and come back to it?
No, let's talk about it now. We'll talk about it now. So, firstly, the definition. So we spoke about hydrogen ions being an ion, right? Just like sodium, Na+, potassium, K+, chloride, Cl negative, and so forth. You can have positive or negatively charged ions. A positively charged ion is a cation. If you like cats, that's how you can remember that, positively charged. And a negatively charged ion is an anion. Now, generally speaking, the body loves to balance both concentrations and charges within the body, right? So if you were to add up all the positively charged cations in the body and all the negatively charged anions, it should theoretically be a net charge of 0.
So equal.
Equal, right? Net charge of 0.
Unless it's maybe an excitable tissue.
Yes.
And you're setting action potentials.
Exactly.
Okay.
So now the thing is you can't to measure as a scientist or as a...
So if that was out of balance, would that mean you'd just be like full of static electricity and be zapping people?
No, because that's only at the periphery.
But you know what I mean?
Like, yeah. I mean, charge differences across membranes is what causes electrical impulses. Yeah.
But in theory, that's what would happen.
Yes.
Okay, let's go with that. I like that.
Okay. It's not correct.
So it's like you're wearing nylon pants.
Well, which you are. And unfortunately, people can't see in the video. All right.
Don't wear nylon pants whilst filling up your car with petrol.
Very true. Yes.
I've learned that the hard way.
And then don't moonwalk to the counter or register to pay for it. So if you were to add up all the cations and anions, it should be around about an equal or negative charge, right? A 0 charge.
So they're neutralised each other out.
But the thing is that if scientists and doctors, we can't calculate everything right? So what we do is try and calculate the majority of the positive stuff and the majority of the negative stuff. So the majority of the positive stuff, because we're taking it from your blood, is extracellular. And the most abundant extracellular positive thing is?
Sodium.
All right, so we've got sodium. That's our representative of all the positive stuff, right? And then to represent all the negative stuff, we've got two things. Chloride, which we know is with sodium outside the cell because sodium chloride is salt. You know, it sits outside the cell. So we've got chloride and then we've got bicarbonate. So if you to add up all the sodium and minus all the chloride and all the bicarbonate, what you get is something approaching 0 of neutral, but it's not. It's what, 4 to 12?
Yeah,
right?
3 to 12, yeah.
Millimoles per litre?
Milliequivalent.
Milliequivalents, yeah. So it's around about that. So we know that that's the gap that we have between the positive and negative stuff. Now, you might be asking... And
that's called the anion gap.
It's called the anion gap. Now, you might be asking, who cares about an anion gap when we're talking about pH here? You haven't even said anything about hydrogen ions. So how is this important? Well, it's important in metabolic acidosis because of bicarbonate.
Yeah.
The bicarbonate levels effectively will change in metabolic acidosis. As we said, by definition, bicarbonate levels should drop, right?
Yes, that's right.
But the thing is, you can have bicarbonate levels changing to greater degrees.
Yep.
So give us an example of a normal anion gap, which is between 4 to 12, and a larger anion gap.
Okay. So what do you when you said give an example, do you mean a condition that would cause this?
Yeah. So if, for example, I measured you've got metabolic acidosis, and I measure your anion gap, and it's 7, right?
Okay, so it's normal.
It's a normal anion gap.
But I have metabolic acidosis because my pH is low
Yeah.
and my bicarbonate is low.
So people might say, but if your bicarbonate's low, shouldn't your anion gap be
larger. Yep.
So explain.
So going back to the way you explained it is in your blood, you have positive, negative things, and they must be equal to make your blood electrically neutral. Now, the way we are measuring it is looking at sodium versus those two other ones.
Yep.
But that gap, that 3, what do we call it? 3 to 11.
Yeah, 4 to 12 I said, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, 3 to 12. We'll say 3 to 12.
Sure.
That gap is still things, but we just can't measure it.
Yeah.
And they are what we call negatively charged things. So if you were, can I do it the other way around? I think the other way will be easier.
Any way you want.
Yeah.
Any way you want.
So I'm going to do the high anion gap ones. So if you were in a state where there's increased acids being produced. So let's say you had diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and you were poorly managing this situation, and you started because you had no insulin in the body, so you run out of insulin completely.
Yeah.
What the body kind of does when it has zero insulin, it thinks, oh, we're in a starvation state.
Yep.
We need to recruit other material to make our energy. And one way is it just starts recruiting lots and lots of fatty acids.
Yep.
So the fatty acids should give it away in the sense that it's going to start producing acid.
All right.
Now, this process is sending lots and lots of fat to the liver, and the liver gets overwhelmed by it and says, I can't make so much glucose of all the fat you're sending me. I need to make ketones instead.
Yep.
So the liver starts pumping out these ketones, which are keto acids, and this is called ketogenesis.
Yep.
And by doing this process, you're making lots of organic acid.
Yep.
Okay, so your blood is getting filled up with this organic acid.
Yeah.
Okay, so as you said earlier, what's an organic acid? What's an acid? It's a thing that donates hydrogen.
Yeah.
So as soon as the liver's pumping into the blood, it's pretty much separating into hydrogen, which is why your pH is going down.
Yep.
But now you're left with this conjugate base.
Yep.
Whatever it is. But you've got this big negative thing.
Lactate.
Okay.
Not lactate, sorry. The keto base.
Yeah, the keto base. So now you've got this negative thing
Yep.
that is taken up that kind of neutrality.
So that gap that's normally there of negative 12, negative 3 to negative,
yeah.
3 to 12 has now increased.
That's right.
Because
exactly. You've got organic acids that are taking up the slack of the bicarbonate.
Yeah.
But because you're only taking the blood and looking at chloride and bicarbonate specifically, it looks like the gap has gotten bigger.
Yeah.
But it hasn't. It's just there's more acids in there, more negative.
That aren't being taken
recorded
into account.
That's right.
Yes, exactly right.
So that makes sense? So therefore, when you look at metabolic acidosis, one section that we can look at is all the causes that have large anion gaps.
Okay.
And these are basically acid-forming molecules. So anything that acid is being added to your system, whether through ingestion, you're ingesting acid, or your body is making acid, you're going to start to get a high anion gap metabolic acidosis.
And that's due to the conjugate base that's produced from that acid.
Yeah.
All right. So anything that's not directly affecting our bicarbonate levels is going to be, that's producing a conjugate base, will increase the anion gap.
Yeah. So the anion gap, in both cases, the metabolic acidosis is going to result in low bicarbonate, but in the high anion gap is you're getting more of the anions coming from these unmeasured things.
Yeah. We know that
it just looks like the gap is getting bigger.
Yes, we know that if somebody has metabolic acidosis and the bicarbonate that's mopping up the hydrogen ions in this scenario, that the gap will be around about 3 to 12. But in a situation where we can't take that into consideration, we can't take into consideration the additional conjugate bases that are produced. So, for example, like you said, ketoacidosis, lactic acidosis.
And this is where the mud piles is. And that's why I pulled it up earlier. Mud piles, when you hear the mud piles,
as a mnemonic for
it only accounts for high anion gap metabolic acidosis.
Yeah.
But the one we're going to use is all metabolic acidosis.
It covers everything. So
that's high anion gap. Did you want to mention some of the types?
of high anion gap.
Yeah. So
I did.
Okay, you happy with that?
Diabetic ketoacidosis.
So that's the classic way you'd get ketogenesis.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get it from alcoholism,
Yes,
and you
that's
can get it from starvation.
Yes, that's true.
But it's going to be less likely. You'll less frequent this situation than you would if it's a diabetic ketoacidosis state.
And lactic acidosis are probably two of the major ones.
So lactic acid, that's incorrect, right? Lactate.
Well, no. Well, let's just go with lactic acid.
So this is a situation where you haven't got enough oxygen
Yep.
with the mitochondria
That's
or
right.
in the cell to drive Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. So your cytoplasm makes ATP kind of without oxygen.
Yep.
And this is called anaerobic respiration.
Yep.
And this can be done short-termish.
Yeah, it basically takes pyruvate, turns it into lactic acid, which turns into lactate. And
this
again,
process
because
is an acid.
So it releases hydrogen ions. This may not necessarily be happening because we can't directly measure lactic acid in the body. We can measure lactate. That's present. And we know that pyruvate can directly turn to lactate without needing to turn to lactic acid. So effectively, it could be pyruvic acid turning into lactate, but regardless, it could release a hydrogen ion.
Okay.
And so in this process, this does happen most predominantly when there's low oxygen as an alternate way to very quickly, not necessarily to produce ATP, but to produce the substrates that help produce ATP, so NADH and NAD+.
Yep, all right.
That's the reason why we go down that pathway, is to produce those carrier molecules that can then produce ATP downstream. But regardless, if a tissue is hypoxic, so it's
so this is a good point.
so we're not just talking about exercise here. We're not talking about me going for a 100-meter sprint and I get metabolic acidosis. I'm talking about the fact that maybe I've got hypoperfusion of tissues, or I've got a problem with the oxygen saturation of my blood, or whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, if certain tissues of the body aren't getting enough oxygen, they undergo this process of trying to make energy without oxygen, and that produces lactic acid, or at least acid with lactate.
So that's the conjugate base.
As the conjugate base.
And that would be add into the anion, which would create the gap.
Which creates the gap.
So
in the same way that the keto base.
So that would be
produce
the
that.
keto base has been acetone.
Yeah, hydroxybutyrate.
And whatever the other one was.
Yeah.
Acetyl acetate.
Something like that.
Okay.
Yes.
And so the
Are
point.
there any others for the anion gap? They're the two majors.
So the point there is, so like you said, the patients that you're going to be seeing lactate issues with aren't sprinters. They are going to just get a decrease in tissue perfusion, and that could be through situations like heart failure, shock, any kind of hypovolemia where they've lost blood or lots of fluid, and their tissues aren't being perfused with oxygen.
Yes, exactly. So, all right. So at the end of what we've said with metabolic acidosis, we've stated that clinically it's diagnosed by a drop in bicarbonate levels, right? A concentration of bicarbonate.
Or metabolic acidosis, yes.
Yes, right? All metabolic acidosis, that's the diagnostic. But that's representative of either an increase in hydrogen ions in the body, so via an increased production or a decreased excretion, or it could directly be due to an increased excretion of bicarbonate, right? Regardless, we measure it by the bicarbonate. However, in addition to that, to determine one of the causes, you can look at the anion gap by adding up the positive and negative things. And if the anion gap is a normal anion gap that you'd expect to get from bicarbonate mopping up hydrogen ions without anything else happening, it'll be around about 3 to 12. Or if the anion gap is greater, it means there's more negative things present adding to the gap, right?
Yeah.
The charge gap. And those negative things are usually conjugate bases from other events occurring like diabetic ketoacidosis and lactic acidosis.
Yep.
Cool with that?
Yeah.
All right.
Did you want it?
Now, the mnemonic, right?
Yep.
Did you want something before the mnemonic?
The only thing I'll say, do you want me to give now the example of a situation where you get the normal gap?
Well, I was going to
Or do you want to do your mnemonic?
the mnemonic sort of
Okay, we'll do that then.
explains it, right? So the mnemonic I've got explains not all, but some of the major causes of both metabolic acidosis with or without an anion gap.
Yep. So a high gap and a normal gap.
Yep. And so this mnemonic is...
Was this hard to make?
No, it's pretty easy once you saw it. L. Musk Shat.
Shat.
L. Musk Shat.
So this is
Just L. Musk Shat.
potentially referring to a
No,
bit.
not potentially referring to anyone.
Okay. And shat is past tense.
Yes, it has happened.
Okay.
So L. Musk, E-L,
Oh, eel.
right?
Okay.
Musk, Shat.
So let's go through it.
Okay. E
E.
is ethyl glycol.
So we don't have this so frequently in Australia, but this is antifreeze, right? So this would be something you put in your radiator, stop freezing with sub-zero temperatures.
Yeah, but we live in Queensland, and I don't think it's gone below zero.
So the
in
reason
50
why
years.
this would be ingested it's just self-harm,
Yeah.
but it's a convenient substance that they decide to ingest.
Yep.
So there's nothing specific to that. It's just someone potentially sees it.
No, I assume you can get a bit of a high in the same way that you probably
okay.
can with ethanol and methanol.
Okay, all right.
But ethyl glycol is metabolized by the liver similarly to ethanol and methanol.
Okay.
But what it ultimately produces
Is acids.
is acids.
Yeah,
and it does this by overproducing NADH, which is a carrier molecule for hydrogen ions that we use in metabolism, right? We shuttle hydrogen ions and electrons to the electron transport chain of the mitochondria using NADH. And if you produce too much NADH, it means the ratio of NADH and NAD plus is out of whack.
Okay.
And it just means that you end up producing too many free hydrogen ions.
Okay,
Right?
all right.
And that's ethyl glycol.
And I think that becomes oxylitic acid.
It becomes
it's
oxalate crystals. And the oxalate
So oxalate
crystals,
would be its base. Is that right?
No, because you end up... oxalate probably would become the base. But you end up producing oxalate crystals in the kidneys that sort of block it up in a way.
Yeah, I think that's
and
one
damage
form
it.
of kidney stones, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then the L in L must
Well, that's a lactate.
lactic acidosis. Yeah.
Okay.
The M is methanol. And
Okay, methanol. So that's like a slight variation to ethanol.
yeah, one that really
Sends you
could-
blind.
Yeah, in both ways, and could definitely kill you. But again, similar to the ethyl glycol, goes to the liver, gets metabolized. This time it doesn't.
You become Ant-Man.
Well, yeah. So what are you referring to there?
Well, ants make formic acid. I think
Yes.
part of their bite. Isn't that right?
Yeah. So
And so your liver makes formic acid, and that's the acid-forming molecule.
yeah, it creates formaldehyde, which then turns into formic acid, which produces the hydrogen ions, and then again the metabolic acidosis.
Okay.
And a similar thing that the ethyl glycol with the NADH to NAD plus ratio gets out of whack. The U in L musk is uremia,
Or uric acid, yeah.
right? So again, another acid,
Yep.
which is a byproduct of amino acid metabolism.
That's probably the kidney not working. So it
Yeah.
can't get rid of uric acid, so you become acidic.
So you accumulate ammonia
Yep.
and ammonium.
Yep.
Then the S is salicylates.
So these are painkillers or NSAIDs?
Yeah, aspirin, basically.
Okay, so it's pretty much just aspirin.
Pretty much just aspirin, which is salicylic acid.
So I'm going to say one point here
Yep.
because you can have this overdose. I guess it would be considered an overdose, right?
Yeah, I don't know what the quantity is required here,
But to confuse the listeners,
which Matt loves doing.
this drug, let's say aspirin, can cause two forms of acid-base imbalance
Yeah.
in the short term. So if you were to overdose in aspirin, in the short term, probably before it starts to get metabolized, it actually causes a change in the respiratory center. So you'd actually develop a respiratory alkalosis because it speeds up your breathing rate.
Okay.
But as it gets metabolized, then it causes a metabolic acidosis.
Great. Yeah, that was confusing. So the K is ketoacidosis.
Which we spoke about.
Yeah. So we've done L musk.
We've done L-mask.
Now we need to do shat.
Okay.
So the S is spironolactone.
Spirulactone is a diuretic.
Yeah.
potassium-sparing diuretic.
That's right. So what does that mean?
Well, most of the other diuretics that play around with the way that ions move in and out, but from your filtrate back into your blood, therefore affecting water movement.
So you take a diuretic, it basically says just pee out more sodium.
Or pee out more
ions. So wherever those ions go,
water goes with
the water goes with it. So you
get diuresis.
Remove more fluid, and that's good for edema, also congestive heart failure, hypertension.
Yep,
okay,
exactly.
So you're saying here that spironolactone does that, but it says don't do potassium.
Yeah, that's right. The two probably loop diuretic, which we spoke about at the start, that's the most powerful diuretic. That gets rid of potassium. So then the person might get potassium issues or low potassium issues. Same with the thiazide diuretics. They could also lose potassium. But the potassium sparing one, like spironolactone, this will have a diuretic effect, but it retains potassium. So if a person has problems controlling their potassium levels, predominantly in a low form, then using this drug could be beneficial.
And the reason why this can result in an acidosis is because hydrogen, H+, loves to be swapped with another something plus, which is K+. And we know that if you've got so most of the potassium sits inside cells, and if you're producing a bunch of hydrogen, it's usually outside the cells. And so one way that the body can sort of buffer out hydrogen ions is by letting it jump into cells. But but because it's got a positive charge, you can't just throw a bunch of positive things inside of a cell. It needs to be balanced out. So it swaps it with another positive thing, which is potassium. And so the reason why spironolactone can result in acidemia or metabolic acidosis is because if it's throwing more potassium into the body, that potassium is going to be swapped with hydrogen ions.
Okay, so there could be both the way it's handled at the kidney, but also the way that the cells shuffle potassium and hydrogen.
So spironolactone is keeping the potassium in the body?
Spironolactone, it acts on the same way as aldosterone does.
Which is?
But it blocks it. Well, it's just a sodium water reabsorber, but it does the counter effect.
All right.
So technically speaking, if you had a person who had, I think, Addison's disease, which is a low aldosterone secretion state, it would be the same effect as taking spironolactone.
Okay. So I think aldosterone is a hormone released by the adrenal gland.
Yep.
What does it do?
Adrenal cortex.
Yep.
Which goes to the distal convoluted tubule. And I think because it's fat soluble, it just puts more sodium pumps. I think.
Right.
Sodium potassium pumps, but I think also sodium carriers, which I think at least on the apical surface of the nephron, the way it exchanges sodium and hydrogen, but also there would be a potassium hydrogen effect. And that ultimately, the take-home point here is you are losing. Well, no, I'm going the wrong way. That's how it normally would work. You would lose potassium, and you would hold on to it. But now it's blocking it, so you're doing the opposite effect.
Yes. Yep. Good job. Did you confuse it more, or did you get it?
Well, you're in the normal effect of aldosterone. You're losing potassium, and you're retaining sodium and water.
Yes. So you're Okay. So if you've got a problem with sodium concentration in your body, or you're dehydrated, your kidney or your blood, so your blood volume's low, for example, or your blood pressure's low, your kidneys may trigger the release of aldosterone, which travels to the distal convoluted tubules. Says keep the salt in the body. Water will follow. Bulk up blood volume. Bulk up blood pressure. But again, if you're pulling a positive thing into the body, you got to swap it for another positive thing, which is usually potassium. So then that potassium, if sodium's been thrown back in the body, the potassium must be thrown back into the pee. And so you pee the potassium out, which means you can become hypokalemic. But if you're blocking it with spironolactone, then the potassium stays in the body. And then if you've got more potassium in the body, then you can swap that potassium with hydrogen ions.
That's where I got it wrong.
That's in the cells, and then the hydrogen ions jump out of the cells, increase in the extracellular fluid, and now you've got acidosis.
Acidosis,
right?
Yeah.
Now that also then leads to the H in SHAT, which is hypoaldosteronism.
Yeah, which is basically the same as the one above it.
Yeah.
So one's a condition, one's a drug.
Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. Stopping aldosterone is just like giving someone spironolactone.
Yeah.
And then acetazolamide.
So that is also a diuretic,
Yeah.
but that works at the proximal convoluted tubule.
Right.
And this is typically given, I think it's an anhydrase inhibitor.
Yep.
So that's a enzyme that smashes water and carbon dioxide together.
Okay.
Or it could also smash hydrogen and bicarbonate together to make carbonic acid.
Right. So
Okay.
why would you want to give somebody a drug that binds carbon dioxide with water?
Well, in this case, you are you can get rid of water this way, so it is a diuretic.
Okay.
Okay, but it's typically also used in cases of mountain altitude sickness.
Yep.
And so here, which we'll get to later when we get to respiratory alkalosis.
Yep.
Okay. But in the case of respiratory alkalosis, you are breathing off too much CO2.
Yep.
So you become basic from a respiratory driven process.
Yep.
So you would give this drug, what's it called?
Spironolactone, acetazolamide.
Right.
Yep.
You'd give that, and that would try to counter the alkalosis problem by holding on to more acid.
All right, cool. All right.
And so therefore, too much of this drug or a side effect of it is to become acidic.
Now, the T in SHAT is tubular acidosis, so specifically renal tubular acidosis.
Type 2, yeah.
So what's that mean?
Same location, pretty much the same location as that drug that we just mentioned. Say it again.
Acetazolamide. Matt's not very good with names.
So the PCT,
Yeah.
the PCT
Proximal convoluted tubule.
is the location of the kidney that reabsorbs 99% of your bicarbonate.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to have a condition that affects its ability to reabsorb, you're going to be just losing potassium. So you're just peeing out potassium from this type of tubular necrosis. So that's why you lead into an acidosis, because you're just not reabsorbing the bicarbonate at the PCT, the proximal convoluted tubule. It's staying in the filtrate and you're peeing it out.
Right. So in this case, it's not about raising hydrogen ions. It's about reducing bicarbonate.
Yeah. So this one would be a low anion gap form of metabolic acidosis.
And then even though we've done L-MuSK-SHAT, the final part of this, which we haven't said.
We've forgotten an important one.
We have. So when you hear the word SHAT, think diarrhea, and that's the very last term. So diarrhea is the very last way. And that makes sense because you're going to produce bicarbonate from your pancreas to neutralize your stomach acid once it's in the first part of your small intestines. And usually it binds with the bile and you reabsorb it back into your body and you reutilize it. But if you have diarrhea, there's no time for reabsorption of the bicarbonate. It just poops out and you can lose excess bicarbonate through diarrhea. Does that make sense?
So you could say L-MuSK-SHATs and just add an S at the end.
Yeah, for squirts.
Yeah.
All right. And again, L-MuSK isn't referring to anyone in particular. So that is metabolic acidosis.
Great.
All
great.
right. What now?
That's the hardest one. That's the hardest one. That's why I'll put it first.
Let's go home.
So now we go to the opposite end. Well, actually, before we move on, we should just talk about how this would look on an ABG.
Yep.
And then what you may expect the respiratory center to be doing or the respiratory system to be doing.
Or maybe just what you would expect the compensation mechanism to be.
So as we said, if you did a ABG strip, so that would be looking at the pH.
What do you mean strip?
I don't know, that's what it's called.
Okay.
Just say a blood gas. If you did a blood gas, the things you'd be looking at to confirm the metabolic acidosis would be a pH. By definition, has to be a low. Then we look at CO2. At this point, we'll just call it normal.
Right.
But bicarbonate is going to be low.
Okay.
And that's the reason for why it's a metabolic acidosis, because it's driven by a low bicarbonate. Okay. Happy with that?
I'm happy.
Now, whether it's now going to be compensated, we would then look at the CO2.
Okay.
Now, if the pH is still out of range, it can't be compensated. Because it hasn't, the respiratory system hasn't done a good enough job to pull the metabolic acidosis into a normal state. Mm-hmm. It's still out of the pH range. It's still in a acidemic range. Does that make sense? But if the respiratory system has pulled it into the normal range, it's now considered compensated. Okay? So if you had a situation where a person has metabolic acidosis, what would you expect the respiratory center to do?
Well, if the acid goes up in the body, you would assume that it would try to bind it with bicarbonate and produce carbon dioxide and get you to breathe it out.
Yeah. So the respiratory system would be increasing its breathing rate. So you would probably expect your patient to have hypernemia. What is it? Not bradypnea, but
It's talking about
tachypnea. There we go.
Okay.
So they would be tachypneic, meaning they're breathing excessively quick. And you see that as a classic example of DKA. They got something called Kussmaul breathing, which is a fast, deep type of breathing rate because they're trying to get rid of the acid via their respiratory system.
Okay. So you're saying now that somebody who's uncompensated will have low bicarbonate, normal carbon dioxide. But
yes, that's right.
But somebody who's attempting to compensate will have low bicarbonate, but also low carbon dioxide because they are hypercapnic, right?
That's right.
Well, they're not hypercapnic. They're like you said.
Tachy.
Well, they're...
carbon dioxide, carbon
yes, but the
dioxide.
carbon dioxide levels are low now because you're hyperventilating to breathe out all that carbon dioxide.
Correct.
So both bicarbonate and carbon dioxide levels are low, indicating a respiratory compensation of metabolic acidosis.
Yeah. So there's a degree of compensation here.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, whether that's good enough to bring the pH back into the normal range, if it's now brought it back into the normal range, you would say it's a fully compensated metabolic acidosis.
Yep. Okay. Now can we move to alkalosis, metabolic alkalosis, you think?
Yes.
Okay. So metabolic alkalosis, when we take a look at metabolic alkalosis, basically
It is basically,
evaluating it by an increase in bicarbonate.
Yeah, so you're going to have a blood pH that's
higher than 7.45.
Yep. And you're going to see increased amounts of bicarbonate.
Which can represent either a decrease in hydrogen, will represent a decrease in hydrogen ion concentration through either a lack of hydrogen ion production or an increase in hydrogen ion excretion or an accumulation of bicarbonate production or reabsorption or holding on to it.
Or a combination of all.
So what are some causes of this?
So let's start with the loss of hydrogen.
Yep.
The most common way you can lose hydrogen in the body is just vomiting.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So this would just be gastroenteritis, where you've just eaten something dodgy or something that has a microorganism in it.
Yep.
And you're just excessively vomiting, losing lots of hydrochloric acid, therefore losing lots of free hydrogen.
Yep.
And that is going to put you in a basic state or an alkalosis state.
Yep.
Okay.
What else?
Then the other ones would be gaining bicarbonate. So the situations where you're taking on or you are having more bicarbonate than you typically should.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could do this through ingesting bicarbonate. One of the most common ways that this would happen is that if you took an antacid.
Oh, yeah, too many antacids. Yep.
So that would be like sodium bicarbonate, I think is most common.
Yep.
So typically a person may take this if they've got reflux or – so you've had that before because you've got –
Had reflux, yep.
So what would you have taken?
Well, a PPI, but that's not an antacid. Well, it's in a way an antacid because it blocks protons, but it doesn't make you alkalinic. But there are oral antacids that you can take.
So like Mylanta.
Yeah, like Mylanta. I was just trying to think, but I think the active ingredient is sodium bicarbonate. Yeah. And again, it just tries to mop up all the excess hydrogen ions.
Yep. So if you were to have excessive amounts of these antacids and you were taking in lots and lots of bicarbonate, then you would be shifting the pH towards an alkalosis state by taking on more base.
And often metabolic alkalosis is going to be associated with high urine chloride levels. And so things like licorice, if you have too much licorice, excess alkali, for example, like you were stating, refeeding alkalosis and diuretics, it can also result in high urine chloride levels as well. And that has to do with also the fact that bicarbonate and chloride tend to be exchanged often. So, yeah.
And that also takes us back to the low or the normal gap metabolic acidosis.
Yeah.
The thing that's taking up the weight of bicarbonate loss in the normal anion gap is chloride.
Yes.
And so metabolic acidosis with a normal gap would actually result in high amounts of chloride in the body because that is making the gap smaller because you're actually bringing up the chloride to counter the loss of the bicarbonate.
That's right.
And you're actually measuring that in the blood test.
Yep, exactly. Other things that can cause...
Well, high amounts of aldosterone, so that's the kind of opposite to what we saw in the acidosis.
Cushing's?
So having too much aldosterone.
Cushing's?
Well, the Cushing's is also cortisol.
Okay.
But because it's coming from the cortex, it can result in the aldosterone as well. And then my example at the start with you taking diuretic.
Oh, yeah.
The loop diuretic.
Yep.
Loop diuretic. Because when I said, what is the location where you reabsorb most of your bicarbonate in your kidneys?
Proximal convoluted tubule.
So you've reabsorbed 99% of your bicarbonate there.
Yep.
Loop diuretics, they work the ascending loop of Henle. So that's past the PCT.
Yep.
So with these diuretics, you're losing potassium, chloride, and sodium, plus a lot of water. And as a result, you're actually losing lots of body water, but you're not losing bicarbonate relative to that body water loss.
Right.
So you're actually proportionally gaining bicarbonate.
Yeah.
So you're actually becoming alkalytic from that additional or excessive amounts of base.
Right.
So loop diuretics can also lead to a metabolic alkalosis.
Anything else for metabolic alkalosis?
I think that's all.
All right. You can have, it can be due to blood loss too.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So again, anything that's going to reduce the increase the bicarbonate in the blood or reduce the hydrogen ions in the blood. Right. Respiratory. This is easy, or at least easier.
Yeah.
Oh no, we need to talk about. with metabolic alkalosis, we need to talk about what it looks like on the ABG.
Okay. So
and compensation.
So pH will be in the higher range. So generally beyond 7.4.
Yeah.
But typically outside 7.45.
Yeah.
Now, to make it metabolic, there has to be a bicarbonate issue.
Yep, has to be high.
So it has to be high. So you're going to see the pH being high, and you're going to see the bicarbonate being high.
Yep, and the CO2 should be normal if it hasn't attempted any compensation.
So, what you would expect the respiratory center. I keep saying center.
Well, the respiratory center should be in this case depressed.
Right?
So you should be trying to hold on to carbon dioxide, and that's going to try and raise carbon dioxide levels. So if the partial pressure or the PCO2 is elevated on your ABG, it's going to be a good indication that you're going to have an attempted compensation from the respiratory system by holding on to that CO2.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
So you would expect your patients, if they are in a state of metabolic alkalosis, you would expect their breathing rate to be bradypneic, which is slower.
Yes.
Okay, because they're trying to hold on to the CO2. CO2 with water is an acid, so to try to counter the alkalosis.
Yeah.
And again, on a blood gas, if it was uncompensated metabolic acidosis, you would see the pH being high, the bicarbonate high, and the CO2 normal.
Yeah.
Okay. If it was partially compensated, you would see the pH high, the bicarbonate high, but the CO2 in a higher amount.
Yes.
So because
Everything
it's trying to
high.
compensate.
Yep.
And if it's fully compensated, the pH would now be in the normal range.
Yep.
So it'd bring it back into the normal range because it's now compensated well enough for it.
That's it. Exactly. Now we can do respiratory.
Yeah.
This is a lot easier because remember that equation that we spoke about at the beginning, that modified Henderson-Hasselbalch equation, carbon dioxide with concentration of bicarbonate at the top and partial pressure of carbon dioxide down the bottom. Here we're just focusing on carbon dioxide. So by definition, respiratory-based acidosis alkalosis has to do with CO2 levels, right? And so easily put, if you have an increase in carbon dioxide levels and it corresponds with a decrease in pH, you're going to have a respiratory acidosis. So you've got a pH that's now below 7.35 and the CO2 levels are high. Now the bicarbonate levels are normal, right? And so this is a respiratory acidosis. So if we want to think about causes of this, it's pretty simple, right? At least it's a lot easier than metabolic, because at the end of the day, the problem is not getting rid of the CO2.
Yep.
So you just follow the respiratory tract and think of all the things that allow for you to remove CO2. So it's the tract itself, so the tubing, it's the alveoli, it's the respiratory membrane, it's the blood that's flowing to and from the lungs, it's the musculature and the skeletal system associated with allowing for this movement to occur.
And the respiratory center.
And and that's right, and the nervous impulses, so the nervous system also. So you can have, for example, a problem with the brain and brainstem. So you can have a lesion that's stopping the respiratory centers in the medulla from allowing for you to breathe, so you can't breathe out. You could have the neurons themselves are damaged, so you can have lower motor neuron problems that's inhibiting it. You can have the muscles, so you can have a problem with the diaphragm itself or the intercostals. You can have a problem with the external intercostal muscles and the ribs, which is going to be difficult, right? Because while inspiration might be affected, exhalation might also be affected. So holding on to that CO2. You can have a reduction in the surface area of your respiratory membrane. So you could have something like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease like emphysema, where you destroy the alveoli, your surface area is reduced. Less carbon dioxide can diffuse across into your lungs to be breathed out. Or you can have an obstruction. So you can have a narrowing of the airways, like in asthma or in chronic bronchitis. And again, this is going to reduce the CO2 from being able to be expelled. You could also have a depression in the respiratory centers, like opiates. So morphine, for example, can severely depress respiration. So any of these things that result in CO2 increasing will result or can result in respiratory acidosis.
Yep.
The compensation you'd expect, because high CO2 means more acid, you'd expect the bicarbonate to go up as well to try and buffer it out. And so if you have a low pH, high CO2, and a high bicarbonate, you would think, well, that's a respiratory acidosis through renal compensation.
Okay. Yep.
Right?
And then one way.
But long term.
Yeah. Well, this is a good point, because when we look at the respiratory, because unlike the opposite where we saw the metabolic issues where it was a bicarbonate either high or low, the respiratory system works or compensates within seconds.
Yeah.
And so the metabolic acidosis and alkalosis will only be in the one form. But when we look at the respiratory, because we rely on the compensation from the kidney, we can actually break them into two subtypes. We can have a respiratory acidosis, which is acute, and a respiratory acidosis, which is chronic.
Yeah.
Because if you were to develop a respiratory acidosis acutely, like you were to have an obstruction
or
opioids, where you are now retaining CO2 in a very short period of time, there's no way your kidneys can compensate within minutes, hours, or even half the day.
So you should see high CO2, normal bicarbonate.
That's right, because it hasn't had the chance to compensate. But if you have a condition like COPD, where it's a chronic obstructive condition and you are holding on to CO2, your kidneys are likely to compensate with bumping up the bicarbonate to counter that.
So now my question to you is, a longer term respiratory acidosis where the CO2 is high, but also the bicarbonate is high, is no different than having a high bicarbonate with a high compensatory CO2, which you get in metabolic alkalosis.
Yep.
So how do you know that it's not metabolic alkalosis as opposed to a longer term respiratory acidosis?
You just have to look at which derangement is closer to the pH shift. And so if it's more profound so the one way I use, and it's a fairly famous mnemonic when you're looking at your blood gases, I use the word Rome R-O-M-E.
Okay.
Okay, so
Like all roads lead to.
that's right.
Yeah.
So the R refers to respiratory, O refers to opposite. Okay, so if you see a pH shift where the respiratory goes the other way to the pH,
Yep.
and we know the respiratory is CO2. So if you had a drop in pH,
Yep.
but CO2 goes up, right? See how they go in opposite ways?
Yep.
That's a respiratory cause.
CO2 induced.
Yeah.
But if the pH goes up and the CO2 goes up, you're assuming that it's an alkalosis because the pH has gone up by definition. It's an alkalosis.
Yep.
And the CO2 has gone up to try and what?
Well, presumably to try to compensate for it. Yeah. So, but you'd also need to look at the bicarbonate to see, because then you have the the ME part, metabolic, equal.
Yeah.
Or basically meaning it goes in the same direction as a pH shift.
Perfect. So yes, while you might be going, wait a minute, a high bicarbonate and a high CO2, you see that in respiratory acidosis, long-term compensation, but you also see that in metabolic alkalosis compensation. Look at the pH.
Yeah.
The pH will tell you the difference.
And there is ways that I think they can calculate the compensation. I think there's a formula. I think it's called Winter's formula.
Yeah, that's it.
Which looks at how well it's compensating by bicarbonate, essentially.
Respiratory alkalosis?
Well, first of all, I got to give you my nice mnemonic that I came up with for respiratory acidosis.
Do we need one?
Yes, we do need one.
Oh, okay. I thought it was pretty simple because you can just go through the tractor. But that's fine. Yes, go. Yeah, everyone wants to hear you. Terrible. Is it as good as Elon Musk's
I think
shat?
it's better, actually.
Oh, here we go.
So
I bet you it's M. Todorovich shat.
So respiratory acidosis, the common causes of it, the way you can remember it is CO2. So CO, like carbon dioxide.
And the number two.
And number two.
No.
No.
The word two.
The word two.
All right.
Okay.
COTWO.
Yep.
All right. What's C?
So C stands for, we'll call it COPD.
Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease,
Yep.
which can constitute asthma, chronic bronchitis, and emphysema.
Yep.
All right. That's good because that's an obstruction.
Yep. Edema.
Yes, if you're Australian or British. Yes. OEDEMA. Wait a minute. Not peripheral edema.
No, pulmonary.
Okay, so if you've got too much fluid in your lungs, you're saying that the CO2 can't diffuse across the membrane.
That's right.
Stays in the blood.
Yep.
Respiratory acidosis. Yep. Okay, very good. So
T, trauma.
Trauma. I assume trauma to some aspect of the respiratory system or tract that reduces your ability to
ventilate.
Ventilate. Okay,
Probably more, the trauma I would say more associated with the
nervous system,
outer breathing mechanics. So
right,
if you've got broken ribs
skeletal.
or, that's right. You don't want to really ventilate because it's painful.
All right. So that's T. W.
Weakness. So this would be muscular weakness of the, so all the ones you spoke about being,
muscular
motor neuron disease or weaknesses in the chest wall.
Myasthenia gravis.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
And the last one's got a few. It's O.
O.
Okay, there's a few that you could put in here.
Edema.
You could put opioids.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Or technically you could do overdose opioids.
Oh, so double O.
Yeah.
So two.
Actually, there's 3 O's here.
Oh, okay. Opiates, overdose.
Yeah, the overdose would be, sedatives as well.
All right.
But I don't want to use that because that's S.
Like barbiturates.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And the other O would be obesity. So obesity would lead to a hypoventilation because you've got increased intra-abdominal pressure, which then kind of counters the intrathoracic pressure you need for breathing dynamics. So your ventilation would be reduced. So you'd develop a hypoventilation.
Oh, okay. So I like that. CO2. That's an easy one to remember. Good job for once, Matt. Respiratory alkalosis. So this is going to be defined by simply a drop in CO2.
Yep.
And I think this one, finishing on the easiest, main cause, like you mentioned earlier in the case study, hyperventilation due to anxiety.
All causes of respiratory alkalosis is hyperventilation. Like the opposite, the respiratory acidosis is hypoventilation, meaning low ventilation. Now this is too much ventilation.
Yes, so this could be...
So you're losing lots of CO2.
Anxiety, which is probably the most common cause of respiratory alkalosis. Again, central brain stem issues. So you could have a lesion in the brain, or you could have like salicylates, like you said earlier. Caffeine.
Does caffeine do it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have a mnemonic?
Yeah, go on.
Right, what is it? I see you've written pants. So like wearing pants?
No, like...
Oh, like a dog pants.
Yeah.
Right, like my dog wears pants. All right, so how? What? What do you mean?
All right, so pants is your mnemonic to remember the common causes of respiratory alkalosis.
Yeah, which is hypoventilation.
Hyperventilation.
Oh, yes, sorry, hyperventilation.
Okay, so
you've said pants. That makes sense. Okay.
So PE
is
the first one for P.
Physical education. Pulmonary
embolism.
All right. Wait. So if you've got because I'm just trying to figure this through because you've got all your mnemonics are ridiculous. So you've got an embolism, which is a clot, a blood clot, a blood clot, which is there at the lungs, and it's stopping perfusion at the lungs, which means you've got a mismatch in ventilation perfusion.
Yeah.
So you have constriction of the pulmonary arterioles
in that region,
which means you've just got a lack of CO2 being expelled. So is that right?
No.
Okay.
It'd be the compensation for that PE. So you'd actually be going to a hyperpanemic state. So you'd be breathing excessively.
Because less oxygen is getting into the blood, more CO2 is accumulating, bronchioles dilate, you hyperventilate. So I would expect with a PE, you'd have both a drop in O2 and you'd have a drop in CO2.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yes, I think the O2 would be the driver. The O2 would be the driver for the increased ventilation rate.
So for example, if I was admitted into ED for anxiety and I had a respiratory...
Well, that's going to be the A.
Right. Okay, sorry. So let's just... but I'm just highlighting... Okay, so PA, so you got pulmonary edema and anxiety. I have anxiety, I hyperventilate because that's just what happens. And I breathe off all the carbon dioxide. You would expect my oxygen levels to be really high, but my CO2 levels to be really low. So opposite direction. Yeah. But with the PE, because there's something blocking overall gas exchange, you're going to have not just low CO2, but also low O2 as
Possibly,
well.
yeah.
So that would be
it would depend on the severity of the clot.
Yes.
If it's a big clot and you're losing, a whole lung,
sure,
that could be more an issue than portions of a lung.
Okay, so what's N?
Actually, since you said that, you could add another P to it.
Yeah, because everyone wants to do that.
You could have pain as well. So if you have pain, you generally hyperventilate.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. N? Anxiety.
Actually, N was a hard one.
Oh, here we go.
I haven't come up with it. No oxygen. Well, what I was trying to do,
no oxygen.
What I was trying to come up with the N is essentially altitude sickness.
Okay.
So a situation with nil oxygen or very low oxygen.
Okay, no air. That's fine. No air.
No air. There we go. That's a good one. No air.
What's that song that goes, can't breathe with no air?
Yep.
No air, no air.
There we go. So if you can't breathe with no air. So if
Amelia. Does Amelia sing? You wouldn't have a clue.
No, I played this in one of my lectures at the start of the respiratory.
Is it Amelia?
No.
Anyway, you talk, I'll figure it out.
It's a British singer.
Yeah, okay.
So I can talk to personal experience with this one.
Yeah.
When I was in South America backpacking.
Jordan Sparks.
There we go.
Yeah.
She's British, right?
Maybe. But
okay.
Yeah. So anyway, go on.
So when I was in South America backpacking, we were in the top of Chile and we decided to go into Bolivia.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to get copyright.
No, because we're doing
infringes.
it to get our point across. Actually, I will have to delete this off YouTube.
Anyway.
So if you're listening to this on YouTube, a very small section got cut out because I played No Air by Jordan Sparks and realised that we would have been flagged for breach of copyright. So thanks. Anyway, go on.
So when I was backpacking in South America, I was at the top of Chile.
Yeah, we all wish that you stayed there.
I caught a bus from Chile into Bolivia.
What's the distance?
And it was probably
2Ks.
No, it was like a 6-hour trip.
Right. Okay.
Okay, but it goes from
sea
level.
My drive from my house to your place.
Sea level.
Yeah.
To close to 4,000 meters above sea level.
Oh boy, which you can't do in 6 hours in Australia.
You shouldn't,
unless you hop on a spaceship.
So as you're going up the mountain
Yes.
to higher altitude,
Get a bit lightheaded?
the partial pressure of oxygen changes, right?
I would assume so. Yeah.
Because there's less atmosphere above us.
Yeah.
So the partial pressure changes. So therefore our ability to get oxygen across
Yeah.
diminishes. And as a compensation to low oxygen, we breathe quicker to try to get more in.
Yeah.
Okay. And by hyperventilating, you would blow off CO2.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so people who are at altitude, if they haven't climatized, they are hyperventilating and they're losing CO2, which can then push them into a respiratory alkalosis state.
So for every 100 meters or 328 feet that you increase in altitude, your atmospheric pressure decreases by 1 kilopascal. And so if you were to ascend a 1,000 meter or 3,280 feet mountain from sea level, your atmospheric pressure would decrease by 10 kilopascals. And so that is a significant amount.
Yeah, it was probably too much.
Yeah.
My friend got severely sick.
Yeah.
I was just, had limited energy doing much for the next couple of days. I couldn't. We were in La Paz,
You didn't
which is
feel
Bolivia.
sick?
I wasn't sick. He was. He was in bed for 2 days. He was
Wow.
almost to the point where when we crossed the border into Bolivia, he had visa issues
Yeah.
and he couldn't get in.
Wow.
And so he's like, just leave me here.
God.
And it was in a mountain pass.
See, it changes. So how's this, right? So if you ascend 1,000 meters, the atmospheric pressure decreases, like I said, by 10 kilopascals. What that means is that your partial pressure in the form of millimeters of mercury go from the partial pressure of oxygen at sea level being 160 millimeters of mercury down to 85 millimeters of mercury.
And that's why they actually tell you probably only should go up 1,000 meters a day or something, right?
Yeah. Which isn't great
No.
because the partial pressure of oxygen in your alveoli needs to be at about 100 millimeters of mercury for it to cross the respiratory membrane. Anyway, that's not good. So,
So he was crook. I wasn't so bad, but I couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without having to stop.
because you can get pulmonary edema too
Yeah,
if you're not careful, which you
Or
probably
cerebral edema.
still. Oh, that's what I meant. Sorry, cerebral edema, which I think you probably still have. So, what's the T in pants?
Now I've got to.
Oh, here we go. You forgot that one.
What is
too.
this one for? Respiratory alkalosis.
Respiratory alkalosis. Yeah.
Tumor. So a tumor of the brainstem,
Makes
which
sense.
would increase the speed of breathing.
All right. S.
And that's the salicylates again.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But this is short term. I need to stress this is short term.
Yeah.
Acidosis is long term.
Yeah. So the alkalosis is due to the binding of the drug itself to specific receptors, but the acidosis is due to the nature of the drug being a
Broken
salicylic
down.
acid.
Yeah.
Yes, the metabolism of the
That's
drug.
right.
Yeah.
And that's why it takes a bit longer for that to kick in.
Yes.
So you could technically have a respiratory alkalosis
Yeah.
and a metabolic acidosis from too much aspirin.
Yeah. There you go. Look, it's confusing, isn't it? And I think we may have made it worse for people. But
No, I think we got there in the end.
well, I hope so. I hope so. Anything else we need to cover, Matt? Or do I need to sing Jordan Sparks and Chris Brown's No Air by myself?
I'm not going to sing it.
Gonna be wind. What's the lyrics? The lyrics are. Do you think everyone would want to hear
No,
me
I
sing?
don't think so.
It starts like this. Ooh, 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 ooh. Okay, no, we won't do that. We've got some emails to
that's
read
right.
from our dear listener who's sent us multiple emails.
I'll start
One
with.
listener.
I'm not sure if this is spam or not, but I'll read it. This is from Rachel,
Okay.
and the subject is Instagram. Do we have an Instagram channel?
Nope.
Okay, because
I've got one.
the message was just letting you know the link does not work. But I think that might have been just a.
What link? Just to
But
let
it's-
you know, your IG link doesn't work. Are you on IG? I'd like to follow you. No, I think maybe our website has an Instagram link and
okay.
it's not linked properly. Anyway.
Thank you for letting us know, Rachel.
Yeah, I'm so glad you read that one out on the podcast. Matt, I've got one from Barb. Barb's subject is fatty liver. And then the question is,
Matt.
why do you keep Matt on the podcast? It says, do you have any videos on bile after gallbladder removal and also any videos on bile acid diarrhea I've developed both after gallbladder removal. Thanks. Love your informative videos, incredible teaching. Thank you, Barb. Appreciate that. And I'm sorry to hear that you've developed those after your cholecystectomy. I've got a video on bile formation, and I've got a video which sort of talks about what happens after cholecystectomy and gallbladder removal, but nothing specific in regards to, bile acid, diarrhea, and so forth. Matt and I will have a chat, and we'll talk about.
Did we do gallstones and
an episode?
Yeah,
a couple of years ago.
I thought we did on podcast.
Yeah, so maybe type in gallbladder, gallstones, bile into podcasts and have a look. We've got a lot of podcast episodes. I think we have done an episode on it, but maybe not a video. So, Barb, you might not even be listening to this. So, but if you watch the YouTube channel, Barb, hopefully you will see this. Matt,
This one's from Bonnie. Yep. Bonnie, it's very quick email, says, thank you. You guys are amazing. Thank you for everything you do.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you, Bonnie. We thank you for the email. I've got one from Maxine, and it's a topic request. Hey, doctors, I was hoping to request a topic that I thought you guys would be able to explain really well, which is ATP energy system and anaerobic versus aerobic, how your body is using creating energy. Maxine, I've done this. I have done this. I'm sounding like Donald Trump now, by the way I speak. Well, I've sort of done this. If you go to our YouTube channel, I have done videos on this. Type in glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain. I sort of speak about this, but we do need to do a podcast episode on energy systems.
Didn't we do one?
Did we?
You mean
now
like
I feel like we did.
Metabolism?
We did metabolism, but I don't think we did.
We did glycolysis.
Yeah, we did that. So we did metabolism, but not necessarily energy systems. Like, for example, when you turn on creatine phosphate and then when you turn on...
We spoke about it briefly.
Yeah. But Maxine...
And the pool of time you've got to work with these systems.
I feel like we spoke a bit about that. So maybe listen to our carbohydrate metabolism episode. I think that was a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Unlike this one.
Matt. This is from Carl. Carl says, subject, thanks. Hey, Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike.
Dr. Carl. Thanks, Dr. Carl. I think you're better than me. Thank you, Dr. Carl. You definitely know a lot more than I do, and I wish that you would take...
Dr. Carl has like 37 books. So you got a long way to go, Michael.
Yeah, I need to write one.
Thanks, Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike. Thanks for your amazing podcast and YouTube. I used to listen for fun, but now I'm studying a Bachelor of Exercise Physiology on my way to a PhD.
Nice.
Where I want to research free weight training for seniors as a way to help osteopenia and sarcopenia problems.
Love it.
Really love your work.
Thank you, Carl. That's awesome. Good on you.
And good luck.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know.
How you progress.
And if you need PhD supervisors, let us know. That's cool. I think that is a huge area of research focus that people need to look at, osteopenia and sarcopenia, because obviously...
Why are you looking at me?
Because the older you get, Matt, the more you start to just diminish in muscularity and bone density. And I think it must have happened early with you. So,
do you think I have denser bones than you?
I think you've got a denser skull than me. But apart from that...
That's because I'm proportionally more Neanderthal.
True. Well, I'm more European than you are. Doesn't that mean that...
I'm North European.
What does that mean?
From the northern parts of Europe.
Okay. No, as in what does that mean relevant anyway?
I don't know. We're going to get in trouble one day.
I think we will probably get in trouble after this one, especially for the Elon Musk chat mnemonic.
He'll probably like it.
He probably will. Or he'll probably just remove me from X. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, friends and foe.
We know who the foe is.
Probably most of the listeners. Thank you, Matt. If you want to contact us, you can send us an email, gubiosciences@gmail.com. You can go to our website, drmattdrmike.com.au, and you can email us from there. And you can follow us on social media at Dr. Mike Todorovic, at DrMikeTodorovic on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and maybe some others, can't remember. This has been a near 2-hour episode, so I'm tired and I'm going to get some lunch. Matt, peace out, homeboy.
See you, buddy.
Hi everyone, Dr. Mike here. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe. We've got hundreds of others just like this. If you want to contact us, please do so on social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Dr. Mike Todorovic at DrMikeTodorovic. Speak to you soon.